8. Asada Shakur. While attending college in New York City during the 1960s, Joanne Deborah Byron became involved in political activism. After graduating, she started going by the name Asada Shakur and joined the Black Liberation Army, BLA, an underground paramilitary organization that responded to racial injustice by waging war against the government. She eventually became a high-ranking member of the BLA and may have even been the group's de facto leader for a short time. In 1972, Shakur allegedly led a BLA cell that was suspected of murdering several New York City police officers and became the subject of a national manhunt. In 1973, Shakur was involved in a shootout with law enforcement on the New Jersey Turnpike, which killed Trooper Werner Forrester and left Trooper James Harper injured. Shakur's attorneys argued that she was innocent due to an injury she received during the exchange, but she was ultimately convicted of murder and 7 other felonies in connection with the incident. In 1979, 2 years after being sentenced to life without parole, she escaped from prison with the help of some of her political associates, who held corrections officers at gunpoint and threatened them with a stick of dynamite. Luckily, nobody was injured, but Shakur fell off the radar. It's believed that she spent the next several years living in Pittsburgh and the Bahamas before fleeing to Cuba in 1984, where Fidel Castro granted her asylum. Apparently, the Cuban government gave her roughly $13 per day toward her living expenses, and her daughter joined her from New York the following year. American authorities tried to have Shakur extradited from Cuba, but they were no more successful in her case than they were in the attempts to extradite around 90 other fugitives who were believed to be hiding out in the country. In 1989, Shakur told WNBC reporter Ralph Penza that she still lives in fear of the New Jersey State Troopers, and that her trial was wildly unfair. To this day, opinions remain divided on the controversial activist, with many seeing her as a heroic advocate for racial equality. However, others accuse her of concealing inexcusable crimes behind revolutionary rhetoric. 7. Kevin Johnson. On the evening of July 5, 2005, police officers in Kirkwood, Missouri, began investigating a suspicious vehicle owned by a man named Kevin Johnson. They were unaware that there was a warrant out for Johnson's arrest, but he naturally assumed that they knew. The search was interrupted when Johnson's little brother had a seizure, prompting the family to ask the officers for help. Sergeant William McKenty was one of the several officers who rushed to the scene to provide additional assistance. Sadly, the boy passed away at the hospital from a pre-existing heart condition. Later that evening, Johnson retrieved his handgun from his vehicle and allegedly told his friends that he thought the cops were too busy looking for him to help his brother. A little while later, Sergeant McKenty came back into the neighborhood to address a call about fireworks. He was discussing the complaint with some teenagers when Johnson approached the squad car. The man bent down to see through the passenger window and said, "You killed my brother," before shooting at McKenty. Johnson fired approximately 5 times, striking McKenty in the head and torso. He also shot one of the teenagers in the leg unintentionally. He then took McKenty's service weapon and calmly walked away. According to court documents, he passed by his mother and her boyfriend on the street and told her that McKenty let his brother die and therefore deserved to know what it was like to die. His mother replied, "That's not true," but it was unfortunately too late for her to talk any wisdom or sense into her son. Clinging to life, McKenty tried to drive away, but he crashed into a parked car and a tree. He got out of the vehicle and fell to his knees, too weak to walk or talk. Johnson noticed this and reappeared, then shot McKenty twice in the head. He surrendered several days later after hiding out at a relative's house, and was ultimately sentenced to death for murder. His execution by lethal injection is scheduled for November 29, 2022. 6. Justin Wiki. One night in 2018, police on Hawaii's Big Island pulled over 33-year-old Justin Wiki, who had an outstanding warrant for his arrest. However, before officers could have a conversation with him, he fired multiple shots, fatally striking a 10-year veteran of the force and father of 3, Officer Bronson Kalaloa. Officers returned fire, but Wiki fled on foot, sparking a major manhunt. Using an armored vehicle to block the road, police set up a checkpoint and searched all cars leaving the area. 3 days after Kalaloa's murder, while searching a vehicle, Sergeant Brian Tina lifted the tailgate, which caused clothing and other things to fall onto the pavement. As he collected the items off the ground and put them back into the car, he brushed against a blanket and got the distinct impression that there was a person hiding beneath it. Suddenly, 2 bullets were fired from under the blanket, striking Sergeant Tina in the chest. Officers returned fire, and Wiki's lifeless body soon rolled out of the cargo hold, bringing the manhunt to an end. A fellow passenger said that Wiki had admitted to shooting Officer Kalaloa and that he didn't want to return to prison. Several witnesses confirmed that Wiki fired the first shots during the vehicle search, and the officers involved were cleared of any wrongdoing. The 3 individuals who were with Wiki during the second shootout were convicted on several counts for helping him evade law enforcement. 5. Ralph Bucky Phillips. After serving his time for a burglary conviction in 2005, Ralph Bucky Phillips failed to report to his parole officer and was sentenced to 90 days at the Erie County Jail in western New York. Just 4 days shy of his planned release in April 2006, he cut through the roof of the facility's kitchen with a can opener and escaped. During the early stages of Phillips' time on the run, he became somewhat of a folk hero in the region. It's believed that numerous friends and family members harbored the fugitive, enabling him to stay one step ahead of law enforcement. 2 months into his escape, State Trooper Sean Brown pulled over a car matching the description of a stolen Mustang and came face to face with Phillips, who shot at him and sped off. Luckily, Brown survived but suffered serious injuries. The hunt for Phillips continued for 3 months and spanned several counties as authorities followed a trail of break-ins and reported sightings. After learning that investigators planned to detain and question his family, he issued his latest of several threats against law enforcement. Police finally caught up with Phillips at a relative's house in Chattanooga County, where he engaged in a shootout with New York State troopers. He seriously injured 38-year-old Donald Baker Jr. and killed 32-year-old Joseph Longobardo. However, Pennsylvania State Police were able to capture him about a week later. He pleaded guilty, or in his words, guilty as hell, to murdering Longobardo and shooting troopers Brown and Baker. Phillips is currently serving a life sentence at a maximum security prison, where he's extremely unlikely to escape. 4. Carl Wayne Bundchen. Carl Wayne Bundchen had a criminal history dating back nearly 30 years. When Houston police officer James Irby pulled over a vehicle he was riding in as a passenger in 1990. While Irby spoke with the driver, Bundchen exited the vehicle and shot the policeman in the head, causing him to fall to the ground. Bundchen then fired 2 bullets into the officer's back and shot at several bystanders as he fled the scene. He tried to shoot a driver during an attempted carjacking, held another person at gunpoint, and fired at an officer before finally being apprehended. A jury convicted Bundchen of capital murder in 1991 and sentenced him to death. However, his sentence was vacated in 2009. And in 2012, he went to trial again. He was then sentenced to death for the second time. Over the years, Bundchen repeatedly expressed remorse for his crimes, but he failed to obtain the mercy needed in order to avoid capital punishment. After exhausting all his appeals and failing to secure clemency or get his sentence commuted, Bundchen's execution was scheduled for early 2022. A bout of pneumonia delayed the punishment one last time. The 78-year-old convicted cop killer was marched to the death chamber at the Texas State Penitentiary's Huntsville unit. Bundchen gave a lengthy final statement once again, expressing remorse for his actions, but failed to fully take responsibility for Irby's death. After spending 31 years waiting for Bundchen's punishment to be carried out, his execution came as a relief to the slain officers' loved ones, who were finally able to gain some semblance of closure. 3. David Sweat. Before David Sweat escaped from the Clinton Correctional Facility in upstate New York with fellow prisoner Richard Matt in 2015, very few people knew who he was. The pair led authorities on one of the most expensive manhunts in the state's history, costing taxpayers around $23 million. It ended less than a month later, when Sweat surrendered shortly after Matt died in a shootout with police. Sweat's overnight notoriety sparked curiosity about why he was in prison in the first place. On July 4, 2002, he and two of his accomplices stole several guns from a vehicle. They were loading the firearms into Sweat's car when they were approached by Broome County Sheriff's Deputy Kevin J. Tarsia. At first, the men tried to hide, but Tarsia spotted them. With a loaded gun in hand, Sweat fired at least 22 bullets at Tarsia, who continued fighting for his life even after one of the bullets pierced his body armor. Sweat then got into his car and ran over the already dying trooper, breaking several of his bones. The confrontation ended when Sweat's cousin, Jeffrey Nobbinger Jr., took Tarsia's service weapon and shot him twice in the head. Police apprehended the trio after a short manhunt. Sweat pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and received a life sentence. Considering the brutal nature of his crime, it's not surprising that authorities poured immense resources into catching him when he escaped from prison 13 years later. After being transferred, against his wishes, to a more secure prison in 2022, Sweat staged a hunger strike and lost 23 pounds, 10.4 kilograms, over a 3-week period. Instead of caving to his wishes to be moved back to his old facility, a judge permitted prison staff to force feed him. 2. Zandria Harris and Darius Sullivan. A Bradley, Illinois police officer lost her life, and another nearly died while responding to a call about a disturbance at a hotel in late 2021. 49-year-old Sergeant Marlene Ritmanick and her partner, 27-year-old Officer Tyler Bailey, went to the Comfort Inn to follow up on a report about some barking dogs who were left unattended in a car. They visited a room where they believed the vehicle's owner was staying and encountered several people. At some point during the conversation, shots were fired, killing Sergeant Ritmanick and critically injuring Officer Bailey. The two main suspects, 26-year-old Darius Sullivan and his girlfriend, 26-year-old Zandria Harris, fled the scene. Sullivan was apprehended 2 days later in Indiana, at which point Harris turned herself in. Her attorney, Phil Haddad, told ABC 7 Chicago that his client, a mother of 3, maintains her innocence. Sullivan, on the other hand, has struggled to find representation. The first lawyer he hired withdrew from the case without giving a reason. After giving him several months to find another attorney, the judge overseeing the case appointed a public defender. Both Sullivan and Harris face charges of first-degree murder and attempted murder. Their cases are currently ongoing. According to a recent update, Harris's attorney is seeking to limit the number of police officers in the courtroom while her case plays out, due to a concern that their presence will influence jurors in ways that will prevent her from having a fair trial. 1. Stephanie Keller. In May of 2019, officers from the Gardendale Police Department in Alabama arrived at a local residence to find Andy Kimbrell suffering from a gunshot wound. Kimbrell, who worked as a patrolman and a school resource officer in nearby Vestavia Hills, was off duty when the shooting occurred in the home he shared with his wife, 43-year-old Stephanie Keller, and their 2 teenagers. Kimbrell's children were in their bedrooms when he was shot. The man was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late to save his life. Keller admitted to shooting her husband during an argument, but claimed it was an accident. She was charged with murder, but was convicted of the lesser charge of manslaughter, which is permitted under Alabama law when someone commits an intentional killing due to a sudden heat of passion. At Keller's sentencing, Judge Alaric May listened to members of both her and Kimbrell's families. And while Keller's loved ones repeatedly described the shooting as an accident, Judge May said that he refused to call it that. He recognized that Keller had no prior criminal history and was a respected community member before the shooting, but pointed out that the same criteria applied to her victim. He sentenced Keller to 20 years, the maximum of the 10 to 20-year sentence she was facing. Would you rather share a jail cell with a convicted cop killer or someone who is accused of killing their mother? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.